The rain had barely stopped when Claire stepped out onto the porch of her modest farmhouse, her baby cradled in her arms. The muddy field stretched endlessly before her, and the morning air smelled of wet earth. To the neighbors, she looked like just another tired farm mom, juggling feed buckets and baby bottles. But behind her weary eyes and quiet demeanor lay a truth no one in town seemed to suspect. Claire was not just a single mother trying to hold her world together. She was the state attorney, a woman who had fought some of the hardest legal battles in the state. And she had won. Life had not been easy for Claire. Her husband had died 2 years earlier in a farming accident, leaving her to raise their infant daughter alone. The community she lived in wasn't always kind. Many saw her as vulnerable, someone who had lost her protector. That perception made her the perfect target for a group of local bullies. Men who believed their money, land, and influence gave them the right to push anyone around. It started small. Snide remarks at the feed store. Mocking whispers when she walked into church with her baby. Laughter when her old truck broke down on the roadside. At first, Claire ignored it. She told herself she was stronger than their cruelty. But the bullying escalated. One morning, she discovered spray-painted words scrawled across her barn, "Weak widow." Another day, her fences were cut, and her livestock wandered loose. The final straw came when one of the bullies cornered her in the parking lot, sneering, "A woman like you doesn't belong running a farm. Why don't you just pack up before you lose everything?" Claire's hands shook as she strapped her baby into the car seat that night, her heart pounding with rage. She had promised herself she wouldn't reveal who she really was, not in this town, not yet. But when the bullies began to involve her child, something inside her shifted. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. This was about protecting her daughter's future. The next day, the town gathered for a council meeting. The bullies swaggered in, loud and confident, mocking Claire as she quietly entered the room with her baby on her hip. "Oh, here comes the farm widow," one of them jeered. "What's she gonna do, cry her way into sympathy votes?" The crowd laughed, assuming Claire would sit quietly as always. But this time, she didn't. Claire rose, her voice steady, carrying the quiet authority of someone who had spent years commanding courtrooms. "For months, I've endured your harassment," she began, locking eyes with the men who thought they could break her. "I've stayed silent, not because I'm weak, but because I wanted to raise my daughter in peace. But let me make one thing perfectly clear, I am not the woman you think I am." Gasps rippled through the room as Claire pulled out her credentials and laid them on the table. "My name is Claire Donovan. I am the state attorney. And I've spent my career putting men like you behind bars." The dirt road leading to Claire Donovan's farmhouse was quiet that morning, but her heart wasn't. She had been awake long before dawn, her baby fussing in the crib, the chores piling up, and the weight of single motherhood pressing heavily on her shoulders. To anyone passing by, Claire was simply another exhausted farm mom trying to hold her world together. But hidden beneath her calm, humble exterior was a truth that would shock her small town. Claire wasn't just a grieving widow running a failing farm. She was the state attorney, a woman who had sent some of the most dangerous men in the state to prison. But here, in this small rural town, no one knew. And Claire preferred it that way. She wanted peace, a place to raise her daughter without politics, courtrooms, or the spotlight. Unfortunately, peace was not what she found. The bullying began quietly, almost in ways she could brush off. A mocking laugh when her baby cried too loudly in church. Whispers behind her back at the grocery store. Men at the feed store shaking their heads and muttering, "Poor widow, won't last a year." But as the weeks turned into months, the cruelty grew darker. One night, she found her barn doors wide open and her animals let loose. Another morning, the words "Weak widow" were spray-painted across the side of her barn in bold, ugly letters. She cleaned it off before sunrise, not wanting her baby girl to ever see the hatred meant for them. But the hardest part wasn't the vandalism or the whispered cruelty, it was the loneliness. Claire often stood by the window at night, her baby asleep in her arms, wondering how much longer she could carry the weight of grief, motherhood, and survival, while people around her mocked instead of helped. Still, she endured. Because mothers always endure. The bullies weren't just kids being cruel. They were grown men, landowners and businessmen, who thought their influence gave them the right to push others down. One of them, a man named Carl, had lost a lawsuit years ago that Claire herself had prosecuted. He had no idea the farm widow was the very attorney who'd beaten him in court, but something in his pride told him to make her life miserable. It escalated one afternoon when Claire was loading bags of feed into her old truck. Carl and his friends cornered her in the parking lot. One smirked and said, "You really think you can keep that farm going all by yourself? Farms take men, real men. Sooner or later, you'll give up and sell. Maybe to us." Another leaned closer and sneered, "Unless something unfortunate happens to you first." Claire didn't flinch on the outside, but inside, she was boiling. Not just with fear, but with a rage she hadn't felt since her days in the courtroom. She held her baby tighter and looked each man in the eye. Then, without a word, she strapped her child into the truck and drove away. But that night, she opened the drawer where she kept her past life neatly hidden away: files, evidence log,